Now, Scott, Ukraine has for weeks now been telling residents in the south to be ready and to evacuate before Kyiv launches this counteroffensive. How much progress has it made?
Well, the counteroffensive is not just planned, it is now ongoing. Starting last week, Ukraine accompanied strikes, artillery, missile strikes, and sabotage operations with ground operations. Now, those are in a place called Kherson province in the south of the country. They've already made some gains taking territory, but the real advances they're making there are the attacks on the Russian supply lines and on ammunition depots, on bridges, and on other logistical positions. And then you mentioned Crimea. While they're not on the ground in Crimea, they're more than 100 miles away, they're also attacking the Russian positions there. So more than half of Russia's naval air fleet were destroyed in explosions on the Saki air base a few weeks ago. So what we're looking at, Yvonne, is not an immediate counteroffensive that succeeds within days or even within weeks, but one which I think over the next few months will slowly grind the Russians down.
So tell us, what is Ukraine's overall strategy in retaking these areas in the south?
It's liberation. It's their territory. It's as simple as this. Now, why is Kherson province so important? Well, strategically, it's on the Black Sea. That's a key location. But in the first days of the invasion, it was occupied by the Russians. So this was a real blow to Ukraine to lose this territory. But now here we are almost 6 months later. Kyiv hasn't fallen, the government hasn't fallen, and so symbolically, if Ukraine retakes most of Kherson province, the war has turned. And you also mentioned the east. Now in the east, we were looking at a Russian offensive taking territory. In the last few days, not only has that offensive stalled, but Ukraine has made some very limited advances in the east. So think, if Ukraine advances in the south and in the east, what does Russia do now to try to claim victory? All they can try to do is pretend that they're still on the offensive when in fact time is against them.
Well, what sort of capabilities does Ukraine have there compared to Russia now?
Well, Ukraine has fought valiantly, first of all, to avoid being overwhelmed, but they were overmatched in terms of equipment in the initial phases of the war. But a very key shift happened this summer with the delivery of US-made HIMARS medium-range rocket systems. Russia's artillery advantage now faced more advanced American weapons that could hit Russian positions with precision accuracy. And once those HIMARS were being used in the south, the Russians found they're not able to resupply their troops effectively. So they are facing shortages not only of personnel, but of key equipment, even as they try to rebuild their front lines.
Well, according to American media, Russia's been forced to buy military hardware from North Korea as sanctions cripple its ability to supply its military.
Well, absolutely. So we've known of the difficulties with Russian supplies going back to April when they had to withdraw from the north. But now we know how critical they're becoming. They are having to depend on this sort of barrage that hits civilian as well as military areas, as well as artillery on the battlefield now by going to North Korea. And they're having to get drones from Iran because they are not able to carry out surveillance and targeting on the battlefield with their own. But here, let me give you a bit of breaking news, which takes us even further. The Russians said officially today that, okay, we're going to have a 3% drop in GDP this year and we'll recover by next year. But internal documents that have just come out in the last few hours, documents that were discussed last week in the Kremlin, say that Russia will not return to its pre-invasion level of GDP before 2030. That's 8 years from now. And that in a best case scenario, their GDP will fall by 8.5% in the near future. And in the worst case scenario, by 11.5%. So it's a combination of military and economic pressure that's limiting the Russian ability to claim an offensive and now possibly to hang on.
That's really significant indeed, Scott. And also, as you mentioned before, time is of the essence to see how much can be achieved before winter sets in. Why is this crucial to note?
Because Vladimir Putin's last card is the energy card. You folks in Australia, I think, are secure from this, but in Europe, you're facing the cutoff of gas supplies when Russia once contributed 1/3 of everything we use for heating, everything we used to keep electricity going. Now, Vladimir Putin is hoping, look, I'm going to cut off gas through the Nord Stream 1 pipeline, which has just been confirmed in recent days. And at that point, European countries might decide, well, we'd rather stay warm than continue to back Ukraine. I don't think the gamble will succeed, but it is going to be the key one to watch as we get into winter.
Scott Lucas, always great to get your views. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.